Hello and welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a little break from doing some scenes here. I thought I would talk about some color theory, the different characteristics of color. I talk about it in my videos all the time, some different aspects of color, but I've never really done just a dedicated video to color, okay? So let's just get right on into it. With color, I'll break it down here. We have hue, okay? And that's just, what is the name of the color, okay? Hue would be green, blue, red, violet, whatever, okay? Brown. All right, now that's just, the names of the colors right there, but where we really start getting into the different aspects of it, or as it applies to the scenes that I'm doing. First one is value. Okay, I talk about this one a lot. Now this one is the most important probably to me, coming from a background of black and white illustration, but the value is the relative light and darkness of a given hue, okay? Or it could be just a tone, it could be a grayscale, but the value is something that I really like to have a pretty decent range of in my cards, okay? And you'll see me talk about lighting all the time, and when we talk about a value, you could go for something really super high contrast where it's, nothing but black being 100% and light or white being 0%. But just in general, I like to have some sort of range of values in my scenes, okay? So that's why I like to kind of arrange my pads. Now I'm just showing you in the Marvy because they're really easy to see. But whatever color scheme I'm working in, I'm typically working in a range of values starting from light, medium to dark. Okay, now if I have intermediate colors in between, like in this kind of this stack of violet tones, maybe not the blue right here, but here's some pinks right here, transitioning up into the darker violet, okay? You can do it with light browns, you can mix and match all of your pads and whatnot, but you'll generally see a decent range of values in my scenes. Here's white in here, and it transitions all the way to near black right in here, okay? In most of these scenes you'll see some sort of vignette type of thing. I think that contains the scene really nicely to have the darkest values on the outside edge of a card. Doesn't have to be in every card, but even when it's a little bit more subtle like this, it's a little bit darker on the edges, so we have our lighter areas. It doesn't have to be stark white, okay? But it's usually light, and we have some aspects of the darkness somewhere in the scene, okay? And I'm not talking about the images that have been stamped out in black. I'm talking about more of the tones that have been applied into it, okay? These ones are dye-based inks right here. This one was using a combination of dye-based inks, gel pens, I'm trying to remember what I used on this one, and alcohol pens. A lot of gel pens on here too, but you can see where this darkness is in here. Darkness down here in the shadows, underneath the eave of the this porch here on the cabin. Values right here are very stark. We have these large tree trunks right here, the tree trunk trio done in black, and then we have this background in here, light, and we have some aspects of lightness down here, and this oscillation of light and dark values to represent light coming through the shadows right here, or shadows being created by the backlit trees. Alright? Now, this is one of the things that I like to do periodically. Well, I like doing it all the time, but I also like working in color too, but I like doing grayscale types of scenes right here because it's a really good exercise in kind of tuning your eye to values, because if grayscale, gray and black, or just simply a black pad is all you're using, it really gets you to see your values and having a range of values in a scene, so that when you go back to your color work after having gone through a few exercises of just grayscale, it kind of puts you more in tune, especially with your darker tones and where to see your shadows, okay? Because if that's all you're working with in black and white, you know, you're a lot more focused in on this aspect of color, that characteristic of color, all right? Now, this is also one of those things when I'm doing in my scenes, when I'm mentioning transitioning your tones, you know, when you're going from the outside in like this, okay? I'm just showing you in red. But when we start on the outside edge of our card like that, and where we are swiping that color in, it's going from wet to dry, so you're automatically getting this range of values going from dark to light, okay? All right. Value. All right, let's see. Intensity. Intensity is different from value. Intensity is dull to bright. Now, some people think that bright, they get bright mixed up with light, okay? Brightness is not the lightness of something. Brightness is the relative intensity of something, okay? So let's take a look at these different blue pads right here. Which one is the brightest, okay? I would say that this one is right here. It's a more intense, saturated blue, right? This one looks like it's almost like white has been added. In this case, it's not. These are transparent colors that we're working with, but it's probably a more diluted type. I mean, it's not this one, just diluted. It's a different tone, but this one is going to be the brightest right here. Now, like in the Marvy line, a lot of the colors are quite bright, even like this dark green right here. It's a, you know, a reasonably bright green, but this one would be the dull one. So in terms of the intensity scale, this would be something like dull. This one's really bright right here. This one's probably somewhere in between these two in terms of brightness, okay? And then this one right here is probably brighter than this one, even though it's much darker. I don't know. It might be kind of close to that in terms of brightness. But, okay, that being said, let's take a look at some different types of pads here. Memento. I don't know. There's a few of them that are... This one's pretty bright right here. That blue's pretty bright. Even the navy blue is pretty bright. But that's on the indexing right here. I know that when I kind of stamp this out, it's probably not nearly as bright. But let's take a look right here. Okay, that's a pretty full saturation of that blue. Not too bright, is it? It's kind of a little bit more dull. Not dull in terms of my interest level, okay? We want that. We want those duller colors, you know, to provide a contrast against the super bright ones. Most of my scenes I do. I don't want all super bright tones, but I want some aspect of brightness, okay? But let's take a look at this one right here, okay? Look at that. It's like a jeweled, you know, tone right there, and it's really quite bright, okay? Let's take a look at the Marvy right here. This one's the Salvia Blue, okay? It's kind of more of a pastel blue, right? In terms of the brightness, it's probably the same brightness as something like this. This one just happens to be lighter, okay? But in terms of the brightness scale, about the same. And let's take a look at this Marvy blue right here. It's a navy blue, okay? Or royal blue, something like that. All right, now that looks kind of close to the Danube blue, right? When we look at their indexing right here, it's not too much different, okay? But let's take a look at the brightness of each one of those, and I guess the lightness too. That color is quite bright compared to that one, okay? Now, as this applies to stamping, all right, let's take a look at some of the scenes that I have here. Okay. This scene right here doesn't get into too many bright tones. Okay, that yellow brack there is reasonably intense. We have this ochre brownish tone up here. That's probably somewhere in the middle of the intensity spectrum. And then we have our dull areas in here. That's really kind of a very pale shade of whatever colors that we're using in here. All right. Now that doesn't always apply. A lot of times in our darkest areas, okay, of a scene or in the shadows, that's an opportunity to get to some of the brightest colors, okay? Because if you have a scene like, or if you look outside and we're looking at like high noon or something like that, you might think that, you know, in theory, okay, the brightest colors are going to be out there, but in reality it's not. When you have such bright light outside, the colors get washed out a little bit, okay? Like on an overcast day is when you would see the most intense colors because they're not getting so washed out. Okay, so that being said, like as an example in a scene like this one, I have the brightest of colors are probably that deeper green in here, okay? And where is that? It's in the shadow areas, all right? The rooftop here, which is kind of representative of, you know, catching the most amount of light, is duller than this area down here. There's a little bit more of an intense brown down here, okay? All right, now, you don't have to think about all of this when you're doing it. Okay, now this one right here, there really aren't very many bright colors at all. It's a subdued scene. It's kind of more muted, okay? So you don't have to have a full range of intensity, you know, in every scene that you do. You don't have to have super bright, okay? I do have some little bits of these little blue gel pen, and that's probably the brightest thing in here, but, you know, on the intensity scale, it's really not very intense, relatively speaking, at all, okay? Now let's look back at some of this again. All right, in the shadowy areas, we have something probably akin to, oh, where did that, here, can't find my tones right here. Here's some of my lighter areas of blue, okay, where I've kind of swiped in like that, and these areas in here are a little bit more dull, but that blue right there is probably this one right here. It's that Salvia Blue, okay? And then this one right here, you can see that blue is pretty intense over there, and it matches something like that. So kind of in the shadowy areas, we get our more intense, bright blues, okay? And then in the snow right here, where it gets a little bit lighter, it's a little bit more dull of a color, okay? So that's like an example of, you know, your different values in here and your different intensities, okay? Now, when you're doing this, too, you don't need to worry about it like, oh, I need to, let me see, how do I get more intense? You know, when you're doing this type of thing right here, you have more of a given ink, you know, a larger buildup of given color, and then when you swipe it out, it gets drier and duller, so you see more of the white of the paper underneath it, so it gets naturally duller. So we're going from dark to light in terms of value, but we're also going from intense, from bright to dull in here, okay? Now sometimes when I get too intense, you know, I really want to knock it back because I don't want, you know, something to be so intense. But just for an example too, in terms of values and intensity, okay, you can use different values and intensities in something like your shadows. Okay, now this is just a watery scene, but you can see in the shadows here, I used blue to create that water pattern down there. Now this is kind of dried, a little bit dull. Let's see, I don't know if I have my water pattern stamp here, but over here what I can do is I can create a deeper, more intense shadow area if I just stamp that darker in the darker areas, okay? And I'll show you what I'm talking about. I have my son's like red shirt right here, okay? So we're looking at all these folds right here, okay? If you're looking at the folds right here, all right, this red right here is probably like that tone of red, okay? But in the shadows right here, you know, it doesn't get more black, right? It's probably more akin to this red right here. So, you know, when it comes to your shadows, you can use both intensity and value to create your shadows. A lot of people think shadows are all black, so they create black shadows. Now, that is one way to work. You can do a grayscale scene and then just color it in. And in a sense, your shadows are going to be kind of a grayish color. But this one right here is just done with all colored pencils right here. And in the deeper areas right in here, I've used more. Let me do a little bit more here to show you an example. This is a green grassy area, but then the shadows, maybe I will go with a more intense and darker version of whatever color I'm using in that given area. Okay, so the harder you, or the more, saturated a color might get, it can get potentially more intense. It's also getting darker in this case. Now remember, sometimes like a really bright yellow is not going to be dark, but that would be very intense. Like this one right here is very intense, okay? All right. Now that's what I like about a lot of the distress inks out there. A lot of the pads out there, the manufacturers make them very bright, okay? And that distress ink line came out, and they were kind of more muted. So if you had like a green like this one before, well, this peeled paint green is kind of similar in terms of the value, but this one's much more aged looking and duller, okay? Because I don't want grass to look like that all the time. I might want it in areas, but I like to add something like that in there to kind of mute it down and knock the intensity back a little bit. So I want the kind of the saturation of it all, but sometimes I don't want everything like hot green or something like that, And that's what's really nice about that. So that is your intensity, okay? The relative brightness, dull to bright. Okay, now the last one is temperature, okay? Warm, cool, all right, or hot, cold, whatever. It's the relative temperature of a given hue. So, your violet tones tend to be kind of in the cool spectrum. Definitely blues are in the cool spectrum. Greens can be a little bit more neutral, like I don't know, like what temperature is this one right here? It's a bottle green. You add a little bit of yellow to green and it becomes a warm green. If you add a little bit of blue to a green and it becomes, the more turquoise, turquoise-y type of color scheme, and it becomes a cool green. And that's the same thing for like I don't know, like this red right here. I don't know, that might have a little bit of yellow in it, but you add a little bit of blue to it and it becomes the violets. You add yellows to it and it becomes the oranges, warms, okay? Anything kind of with, a lot of yellow in it, it becomes kind of a warm temperature. All right, now, how that applies to the scenes, I mean, if you have like a blue sky and kind of, a green grass or, something like that, or browns tend to be, a warm hue. All right, this gives you a nice range of temperatures within a scene, okay? Blue sky, it could be kind of a warmer blue sky too sometimes, but just in general, okay? Down here in your grasses, I can have kind of more of a neutral green or something like that, transitioning into some warmer tones. Let's look at something a little bit more subtle, okay? Something like this. I have both kind of warm tones. I have a very subtle, I don't know, it's probably like a tea dye or something like that. It's a really light hue, okay? Maybe it wasn't that one. It's hard to remember what I've used on these scenes sometimes. Okay, see that right there? That is an antique linen, and that has probably been applied under that gray right in there. So it's that tone right here, underneath here. So we get some warmth, in a very subtle way in here. So we have the blues and that warm tone. We see that little bit of warm tinge that's down here, all over it. So here's my thing. I have a range of temperature in here going from warm to cool, okay? So I have a little bit of both. Same thing in this one right here, kind of blue sky, warm tones down here in the grasses. I have a little bit of warm and cool within my cabin. I always when I'm doing scenes, I'm mentioning kind of a continuity of color, you know, some kind of, intermediate colors. So if we have a blue, kind of warm, or neutral light in the sky, then I put a little bit of that blue down here, okay? But what I'm doing is I'm playing around with temperature a lot of times, okay? I'm creating kind of a continuity of hue as well, but for the most part, that's what I do. I use some of those blues down here, and I'll warm it up. Right here, we don't have too much of a temperature change, okay? But I have a slight one, okay? That's a very light, pale, very dull, okay? Dull blue up there, but again, it's a temperature change, right? And this down here, I don't know, that plum, I don't know what that is. It might be a slightly cooler, maybe, but there's a little bit of a range in temperatures in here from cool to warm. And what do we have in here? We have, dark to light, and we have somewhat of a bright to, dull in here. So anyways, just in general, when you have a range of all of these kind of aspects in there, it doesn't mean my hue, I mean, I don't do that on everything. There's no hue change in this one. It's just one hue. It's monochromatic. But just in general, if you kind of have a range of more of these aspects of it, okay, the more, the potentially richer surface you can achieve in a given scene, okay? Now, I'm not thinking about all these things, every time I do a scene, it kind of happens naturally, okay? A lot of times, when I'm swiping my colors on and there's, just deeper saturations of a given color, it gives me dark to light and it gives me bright to dull. So it just happens, okay? I don't have to force it or something like that. But let's take a look at something here. I have this book by Maxfield Parrish, and let's see some of these aspects and color in here, okay? Now, a lot of times when we're thinking about things like trees, okay, we're thinking about often what they call local color, okay? That means kind of our notions of something, okay? Leaves are green, tree trunks are brown, water is blue, okay? Let's see how Maxfield plays around with this. Now, I always say that the colors of my sky or light source are always going to be the thing that kind of determines the colors that are being reflected off of your objects. So if you get into more of what they call the magic hour in photography, I couldn't remember, you'll see this kind of golden light reflecting off everything. But let's take a look and see what some of the colors he's played around with here in this kind of, I'm guessing this is a sunset scene, could be sunrise or something like that, but, look at this bark right here. It's probably something like, oh, I don't know if I have, let's see if I have some pads here, maybe not that intensity of orange, but we have kind of this ochre right here, right? And some of this bark right here. It's kind of like that color, right? And now look at what colors are created in the shadows. Can you see that right there? That, I would say, is something like this, all right? So let's see if I can see it without this glare here. But see that? It's probably those violets right there. But look at what a great color combination that is. There's a natural harmony to something like this. So the shadows, look at her kind of clothing right there. It's probably white, but it's represented in a color similar to this. This one's orchid, okay? Let's take a look at temperature here, okay? Look at this right up here. We have a warm cloud, but we have a cooler sky right next to it. So we have a contrast in temperatures, but that sky there is probably something like this again, right? And that's definitely some sort of yellow. It's a dull yellow. It's not too intense of a one, yellow, right? So you can play around with things like that. And people wouldn't normally think about that. Okay, I'm going to do a yellow cloud. But I mean, when we look at it like this, that doesn't look unnatural. Now, this is a painting, and he's doing these highly stylized types of things. Look at that intensity of that orange in there. It's practically like that orange, right? And again, here we go with the cool temperatures in there. So how many times do we think about a mountain? Well, sometimes purple mountains, you know. But that house right there is kind of this orangish, you know, brownish tinge right here, okay? But in reality, it's probably supposed to be like a white stucco building, but just in this intensity of the color that's coming down, we see some of that. Here's this kind of more yellowy looking tree. I don't see too much brown in there at all, though, right? But look at that, kind of a purplish sky background. So you can play around with your color schemes a lot. Look at this one, bathed in warm light right there, but look how great this composition is. Yellow and kind of these, I don't know, duller purplish tones, okay? But oftentimes, when do we think about, I'm going to say yellow snow, you know, but glowing snow, okay? Something like that. But it's contrasted with this kind of cooler temperature of the violet right here. I can see some there. This is kind of a violet with a warm undertone because it kind of glows a little bit. So it is kind of like a warm violet, if you would. But really spectacular, and playing around with temperature a lot, you know, in different ways that you would normally think. Look at this one right here. That is definitely, you know, the shadows in here are playing around with your violets like this, okay? Look at that warm tone on that side of it. Trees, you know, multi-tones of trees in here. Yellows, greens, darker greens, okay? Playing around with those values in there. I don't know, this is really why I want to get into some more opaques, you know, to get that type of thing where we can go light on dark. I'm kind of playing around with that a little bit with gel pens, but anyways, play around with your color schemes, and this is a really great book. Play around with your different aspects of color. Bring in some darker and more intense, maybe, colors into your shadow areas like that. And again, just, you know, with your swatches of, you know, color that you're adding into your scenes, achieve kind of a nice range of intensities and values, okay? And the simplest and really easy way to do that is just to vary the amount of ink that you're applying into a given area of a scene, okay? So what do we have here? We have dark to light, and we have bright to dull, okay? And that's what's happening. Something like that. But that little trick that I do on all of that is how that comes about. If you're doing colored pencils, you can hit your areas and your shadows a little bit deeper with some more intense applications or heavier applications of a given color, and you can achieve a nice full range of both value and intensity. And you can play around with temperature down there too if you want to. It's like some of those warmer grassy areas and your neutral to cool grassy areas. I can go cool down here as well. Let's take a blue and just create some blue grass, okay? So say something like this. I mean, there's a lot of different colors in here, but sometimes you won't, you know, in theory, think about, okay, I'm going to do some grass. Let me have some, I don't know, there's probably brown in here too, but a lot of times you're not thinking about, okay, let me use some yellow, green, and blue in your grassy area, even though the components of the green are blue and yellow, okay? But it just makes it look a little bit more full and rich than just doing it only in one hue, okay? So I've introduced some different colors down there with that. You can do it with gel pens and stuff too. All right, so anyways, hue, value, intensity, and temperature. 4 different aspects of color that you can introduce into a scene. Doesn't always have to be that way again, you know. This one right here doesn't play around with temperature too much. For the most part, it's, you know, it's somewhat warm in terms of my color scheme, but we definitely have the light, medium, dark tones in here. And we have intensity. You know, there's some areas in here that are a little more intense than others, you know. It doesn't go into the super bright anywhere, like even in my shadows. But that area in there might be a little bit brighter than something like that, which is very dull, and especially that in the background. Alright, so anyways, playing around with that. I would really suggest playing around with values a lot, you know, do a couple monochromatic scenes and they'll come out like, you know, instead of doing your color work, you're more in the spirit of like a, I don't know, Ansel Adams, you know, black and white photography and whatnot. That'll really get you tuned into your value, okay, and seeing light and dark. And that's the thing that we're often trying to do in scenes, is to create some kind of scene lighting. What I usually just say is keep some areas light within a given space, and what I'm doing is I'm talking about value, light and dark. So I have light and dark sky, clouds are lighter than the surrounding area. I have a light and dark cabin, and I have a light and dark grassy area right here. I didn't put too much light and dark in my pond, but let's say right here on the edges of my pond, maybe I have a little bit more of, you know, kind of shadowy areas in that. Okay. So I have a little bit of light and dark now in my water. I guess it's a little bit lighter because I've stamped that reflection of the cloud down here in my little pond, okay? But you can see I'm going for a little bit of shading in here. So that creates a little bit of range down there. So that's your scene lighting, and that's all about value, okay? Alright, so that is my talk on value. One of these days I'll talk about, I don't know, some different aspects of things that are happening in the scenes. As I started talking about this, I was thinking about texture and creating a range of that. But anyways, I hope that comes in handy. I'm talking about those things a lot. I thought I'd finally just kind of get them down right here with some really sloppy handwriting and whatnot. But anyways, those are the types of things that I'm looking at sometimes in my scenes, okay? I don't always go, you know, for a huge range of any of these things, but oftentimes you'll find a little bit of aspect of all of them in, I don't know, a decent percentage of the scenes that I'm doing. Okay, thanks for watching.